Provinces with live rates and low fees using Revolut.
Well, we're joined now by Keravan Gorjestani, who is our international affairs editor, for more on this. Hi, Keravan.
Hello.
So Trump kept saying this was all about national security, and we are now learning that it is slightly linked to him not winning or being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
That's at least what the U.S. president himself wrote in a letter that he sent to the Prime Minister of Norway. The letter was first obtained by PBS, the U.S.'s public broadcaster, and it was sent to the Prime Minister. But it was also shared by the White House with all of the European ambassadors that are in post in Washington, D.C., to share with their own heads of states and government. And there are a few things that are important in that letter. The first line, of course, is important. Considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize, he goes on, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace. He also questioned whether Denmark had an actual claim to Greenland, saying it's only that a boat landed there hundreds of years ago. We had boats landing there too. And finally, the last sentence, also very important. He says, the world is not secure unless we have complete and total control of Greenland. Now, there are a few things that need to be fact-checked here. First of all, the link with the Nobel Peace Prize. This is something that is completely independent from the Norwegian government. So the fact that he's writing this to the Prime Minister of Norway in itself is a little bit odd, because the Nobel Committee has nothing to do with the Norwegian government. That is, without even wondering whether or not he has indeed ended 8 wars or more, and even without considering the fact that he has also bombed several countries in the past few months. Then you have the issue of national security. The United States already has a military base in Greenland. It also has a treaty that dates back to World War II that allows the United States to increase or decrease the troop presence in Greenland with the authorization of Greenland and of Denmark. And Greenland, being part of Denmark, is a NATO member territory and therefore is protected by NATO in the case of a foreign attack under Article 5. So if you want to defend Greenland, that is totally fine, but you don't need to necessarily annex it in order for it to be protected by NATO. And finally, there's a little bit of a history lesson maybe for Donald Trump about who got to Greenland first and who can lay claim. But it is true that Denmark, after the Norse, have been in Greenland for centuries, even before the creation of the United States of America. And when Donald Trump talks about landing boats and laying claim to a land, I think in the United States, maybe the Native Americans have something to say about people who come with boats and then lay claim to a land that is not theirs.
Let's not even go there. In terms of Europe, it's fair to say, European governments, European citizens are appalled by this plan of Trump's. How are Americans receiving it? How much support does he have in America for this?
Well, it seems that he doesn't have that much support, and it is clear that Americans, by and large, do not want the United States to go and take Greenland by force. That is absolutely clear. There's an overwhelming majority in different polls from 80 to 90%. There's nothing that Americans agree, 90% of Americans agree on right now. So it is pretty significant, including among Republicans who say that they don't want to take Greenland by force. When it comes to buying Greenland or getting it by a deal, it's a little bit different. There is still an overwhelming majority of people who don't want and who don't think that that is in the interest of the United States. But there, when you look at it, it's overwhelmingly the Democrats and the independents that are opposed to taking over Greenland, while there is a small majority of Republicans who would be totally okay with that. But that really sort of replicates when you look at Congress. We've seen Congress, especially the Republicans in Congress, pretty much toe the line with whatever Donald Trump says. But on this issue, there have started to be some cracks. And again, just like the American people, extreme opposition from quite a few Republicans, and not just the usual suspects who criticize Donald Trump, but this idea of taking Greenland by force, that has been rejected by a number of Republicans. For example, Mitch McConnell, he said that it would be a more disastrous decision for Donald Trump's legacy to invade Greenland by force than it was for Biden to withdraw from Afghanistan. That is a pretty harsh comment from Republicans. But there are also some who believe that even the interest and the focus on Greenland and this threat over the allies is not good. One Senator John Kennedy, who's usually pretty on the side of Donald Trump, called it weapons grade stupid to sort of alienate all of your allies to get Greenland. And a lot of Republicans, those who didn't want to be critical of Donald Trump, said that if this was about national security, the United States does not need to own Greenland in order to do that. They have NATO, they have military bases, and they can very well send more troops to Greenland if they want to.
Wow, thank you very much. Kadivan Gordestani there, our international affairs editor.
The European Union says it is continuing to engage with the United States at all levels. The ambassadors of the 27 countries met in Brussels last night to discuss the prospect of retaliation. The broad consensus that's emerged today is to try and de-escalate. The leaders will be meeting in Brussels at a special summit on Thursday. President Trump has threatened to impose tariffs on 6 EU countries, as well as the UK and Norway, starting at 10% next month, unless they acquiesce to Greenland becoming part of the United States. This morning, the British Prime Minister said threatening tariffs on allies was the wrong thing to do, but at the same time he ruled out any retaliatory tariffs. The trade war, he said, is in no one's interest. Our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman, has more.
How to handle President Trump? Sir Keir Starmer's answer to that complicated question is being tested today like never before.
Good morning. The world has become markedly more turbulent in recent weeks. The UK and the US are close allies and close partners. That relationship matters profoundly.
This wasn't Keir Starmer rebuking Donald Trump. This was him trying to justify why he's kept him close.
Mature alliances are not about pretending differences don't exist. They are about addressing them directly, respectfully, and with a focus on results.
All this because of an icy island a long way away which, let's be frank, most of us have barely thought about before. President Trump says he needs more control of the Arctic, that it's vital for American and global security. And he's clearer than ever. He wants Greenland, part of Denmark, to be American instead.
The right way to approach an issue of this seriousness is through calm discussion between allies. Any decision about the future status of Greenland belongs to the people of Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark alone.
This isn't just high-level geopolitics. President Trump's threat to impose tariffs on the UK over its objections to his plans means this matters to all of us.
Alliances endure because they're built on respect and partnership, not pressure. That is why I said the use of tariffs against allies is completely wrong.
Do you think Donald Trump is genuinely considering military action?
Look, I don't, actually.
The Prime Minister predicted that the US would not actually invade Greenland and hinted at the true scale of the transatlantic partnership.
The interaction on intelligence between the US and the UK is the closest relationship of any two countries in the world. And that keeps us safe in ways I can't explain to you.
For a Prime Minister who's invested so much energy in his relationship with President Trump over the past year, it's quite something for him even to say that the US President is wrong. But there'll be plenty in his party and in the country asking whether Keir Starmer went far enough.
Well, it's pretty clear that the Prime Minister's tactics with Donald Trump lie in tatters now, really. The attempts at appeasement of the US President have failed, and it's time for some stronger action.
Other political rivals are backing the Prime Minister on this.
For once, I do probably agree with Keir Starmer. In the case of Greenland, it's a sovereign country, and we have to respect sovereignty, particularly of our allies.
To use economic threats against the country that's been considered to be your closest ally for over 100 years is not the kind of thing we would expect. It's wrong.
What if the President doesn't back down? What does that mean for our trade, for our alliances, for our security? It's not clear that Sir Keir has his answers yet. Well, would any Prime Minister? Henry Zeffman, BBC News, Westminster.
I can just show you some live pictures of Lars Rasmussen, the Danish Foreign Minister, is just wrapping up a press conference on College Green here in London. He's been meeting with Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary, in the last hour. Lots of meetings going on. In fact, we've got Mike Johnson, who is in London as well at the moment, the Speaker of the US House, who said today that the special relationship remains very special. You've almost got at the moment a good cop, bad cop routine going on, because Donald Trump has been giving an interview to NBC News in the last few minutes in which he said Europe should focus on Russia, Ukraine, rather than Greenland. But when asked whether he would follow through on plans to hit European nations with tariffs absent a Greenland deal, he said, yes, I will, 100%. He was also asked whether there would be any plan for a military invasion of Greenland. No comment, he said. We've also seen pictures in the last hour of Scott Bessent arriving in Davos, where Donald Trump will be speaking on Wednesday. The US Treasury Secretary says America alone, America first does not mean America alone. So there is an outreach in some circles within some elements of the administration to European partners, but obviously some very hardline rhetoric that is coming from Donald Trump. And we got a
An extraordinary new development in President Trump's push to take over Greenland as European leaders meet to discuss an emergency response to his new tariff threat. The president sent a letter to Norway's prime minister. According to a diplomat who's seen the note, he wrote in part, quote, "Dear Jonas, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant. We can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America." CNN's Melissa Bell joins us live from Paris this morning. The Prime Minister of Norway now saying, yeah, that's the letter I got from President Trump talking about the Nobel Peace Prize. It's a pretty remarkable development.
It's a remarkable tone that struck in that letter, dear Jonas, that fit of pique almost at not having received the Nobel Peace Prize, used as justification for all that we've seen over the course of the weekend. And that is, John, this extraordinary ratcheting up of this pressure on Europe to try and force them essentially to hand over or sell Greenland to the United States, which is an extraordinary turn of events that now tariffs should be being used at this particular moment to try and exert pressure on Europe. And that timing is really unfortunate, John, for a number of reasons. First of all, because in front of European lawmakers was due this week the very deal that was signed last summer to avert a trade war between the United States and Europe, the trade deal that sets American tariffs at 15% and that prevents the European Union from imposing levies on the United States. What we understand now is that European lawmakers are not going to pass that deal as a result of these renewed threats of fresh tariffs on European Union countries. What that means is that if the deal is not agreed upon, the retaliatory 93 billion euro worth of European counter tariffs that had been threatened at the time before the deal was reached would come into effect in February. So really what you're seeing is the European Union preparing to answer very forcefully after a great deal of outrage expressed over the course of the last couple of days as a result of these renewed threats. The reimposition, therefore, of retaliatory tariffs being prepared even now by the European Commission, even though officially what we've heard this morning from the Commission spokesman, John, is that Europe is looking for de-escalation. They're looking for compromise, dialogue and negotiation, even as they prepare for these very forceful tactics. And beyond the imposition of these frozen retaliatory tariffs lies the possibility of what's been described as the bazooka option. This is the Europeans' anti-coercion tool, which would see an even greater number of limits placed on the United States' access to European markets. So a ratcheting up of the pressure, but a ratcheting up as well of the response, even as negotiation is sought, John.
From a British and a European perspective, this has got much more to do with the sanctity of borders and the fact that you shouldn't allow countries to throw their weight around, because if Putin gets away with it in Ukraine and Trump gets away with it in Greenland, then nobody is safe, and we're going to spend our whole time living in terror that borders will get changed by force.
The trade bazooka is like a genie out of the bottle. Could it spiral out of control where countries are using it in ways that haven't been foreseen, and that escalates tensions with Donald Trump rather than keeping him in a check and balance?
Is Greenland worth this sort of geopolitical fight that is currently taking place?
Mitosis is a process. When cells divide, if you notice, for repair, and what growth it starts in the nucleus.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's going to be a quick one. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions today, but I'll turn it over to the Secretary.
The U.S. economy is doing quite well. As President Trump says, we have a hot economy. We have trillions of dollars coming in terms of investment, and we expect that to accelerate this year. Well, good to be back in Switzerland, and I think that the U.S.-Swiss relationship, after a rocky period over the past few months, is back on a very good track. What do we want to achieve? I think the message is America first does not mean America alone, and I think President Trump will be talking about this is what American leadership in the world looks like.
Next, I'll take right here, Laurent with AFP.
The U.S. will be hosting the G20 next year, and I can tell you in the finance track, we are going to identify the lack of growth as the greatest threat to financial stability. So we are going to be pushing for growth, for deregulation.
And then the EU might be preparing retaliatory measures.
I spoke to President Trump, and evidently there are a lot of inbounds, and I think everyone should take the president at his word.
Could you tell us what kind of communications you've had with European Union officials since your contact?
I don't know anything about the president's letter to Norway, and I think it's a complete canard that the president will be doing this because of the Nobel Prize. The president is looking at Greenland as a strategic asset for the United States. We are not going to outsource our hemispheric security to anyone else.
Great. I think that'll probably be the last one for today, guys.
Last one. I think it would be very unwise. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Amazing. This flock's hard at work growing their nest pensions, like this blue tit.
Dave?
Listen to the way they communicate.
Dave, you're on mute.
Sir Keir Starmer hitting back at President Trump's threats to impose tariffs on the UK and 7 other European countries in the ongoing row over the future of Greenland. Well, let's bring in our security and defence analyst, Professor Michael Clark, who joins us. And Michael, Donald Trump saying you must have Greenland for security. That's the word that keeps coming up. In fairness, Sir Keir Starmer talked about security as well, but national security. You've got the United States, which isn't actually the closest neighbour to Greenland. That's probably Iceland and Canada. But he says it's vital to have that big blob in the middle. Why? Why does he need it?
Yeah, I mean, that's my challenge to this argument. I mean, tell me what security problems are that can't be dealt with under present arrangements. And there's 2 or 3 ways in which security is relevant. I mean, the one way that goes back to the 1950s is security against a missile attack against the United States. I mean, this is the map that we normally see of Greenland. But if you look at the map, the more accurate map is the one from the top down, looking at the roof of the world, the Arctic Circle, because the shortest distance between Russia, or for that matter, China and the United States, if there were to be a missile attack, is essentially over the North Pole. That's the way an attack would come. And so, of course, the United States has been worrying about that, thinking about it quite logically for the last 60, 70 years. And there's the Pichafik space base, as it now is. It used to be Tule for many years. And the United States used to have 17 radar installations and bases across Greenland with 15,000 troops. Now they've got 1 with 150 troops, because that's all they thought they needed until a couple of years ago. And in addition to that, there are 47 radar installations in Canada and 15 radar installations there in Alaska, where the United States label is. That's Alaska. There's 1 in Fylingdales in Yorkshire, in Britain, just slightly off the map there. And there it is. I mean, that makes up what's called the BMEWS, which is the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System, and it's a mixture of short-range and long-range radars. Entirely sensible. So that could be built up on Greenland if the Americans thought they wanted more than 1 base there. And the chances are they will do over time as technology changes. They may want more bases. They can have all of that within the 1951 agreement that they've got with Denmark. The second way in which security is an issue is that Russian and Chinese ships are buzzing around because they're interested in the opening Northwest Passage. Most of that map, remember, is ice. It looks as if it's all sea there, but actually most of it is ice. And within the Arctic Circle, a lot of it is dark for 12 hours and dark all day for 6 months and light all day for 6 months, right on the North Pole. But that varies a little bit around the Arctic Circle. But long periods of darkness, long periods of constant light. And there is interest in the opening of the Northwest Passage because global warming is creating this. And the United States has only really woken up to it very recently. The Nordics, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, they've been talking about it for years. We've been talking about it in Britain for years. America wasn't interested until recently. And then the third way, in which Scott Bessent seemed to imply, and Miller seemed to imply, is that some sort of invasion from Russia or China towards Greenland. Well, they'd have to invade basically across the North Pole. Anyone who thinks that's feasible ought to look again at a map. It's not possible. So.
Hello and welcome to Talking Politics. I'm Tom Bradby.
And I'm Robert Peston.
And we're recording this episode on Monday because obviously the world's gone crazy, like it seems to do every Monday, with Donald Trump apparently poised or not discuss to invade Greenland and certainly choosing to punish European nations who show signs of resisting him. I thought I'd start by saying, as I watched Keir Starmer's press conference this morning, I just had this overpowering sense of what a terrible, terrible position we are in as a country. And the reason why is very simple. We're integrated in an operational way with the Americans at every level. And there are bits of our organizations that could disentangle themselves, however painfully. So, of course, the Secret Intelligence Service could disentangle itself from the CIA. MI5 could disentangle itself from FBI. I think arguably or unarguably, the world would be a more dangerous place if they did, but that is certainly plausible. But when you look at the military hardware and the defense sense, it gets much, much more difficult. There's been a lot of focus on a nuclear deterrent, which is technically independent, but actually in any meaningful sense, in the medium to long term, not operable without, the system launch is shared with the Americans, the targeting data is shared with the Americans, so realistically it's not going to work without the Americans. You go to the level beneath that, you've got F-35s, very quickly they'd be inoperable without the Americans. The Apache, our main attack helicopter wouldn't work at the level beneath that. You've got surface-to-air missiles, we share with the Americans, we buy from the Americans. Now the military people I've talked to today say, yes, fine, you could replace that. There are European equivalents for most things.
Well, not next week, we can't.
No, it's going to take a decade. And the point that was made to me is you've got to buy it, that's massively expensive, but then you've got to train people on it, and that just takes a very long time. So everyone I spoke to said, you want to be independent of the Americans, that's going to take 10 years and a ton of money. Now that, I guess, explains Keir Starmer's very, very softly approach, which I sort of feel is probably becoming very unpopular with people and is really dragging him down. But I don't know, does he have a choice? What do you reckon?
So, I mean, I was sort of puzzled in the end by what that emergency press conference was supposed to achieve. And I actually think the only sort of logic was actually what you've just been talking about, which is he wanted to tell the British people that because of decisions about our security taken over many, many years by previous governments, his hands are tied. He really cannot take an overtly aggressive approach in terms of trying to force Donald Trump to back down with the bullying way he's trying to take over Greenland, the announcement that he's going to impose tariffs on us and some other European countries, because, as you say, our security is so intimately tied up with being on decent terms with America for all the reasons that you spelled out. And I mean, one of the things that in some ways is maddening is that we are sort of unique. As it happens, just by chance, I spent the weekend with a bunch of French securocrats, officials and ministers. And the French position is very different from ours. They genuinely have an independent nuclear deterrent. They also have 2 launch systems, air and submarine. We only have submarine, and we've talked before about the somewhat sorry state of our nuclear submarines. They are not part of Five Eyes. Sometimes that's caused tensions between us and France. Five Eyes being, just for those who don't know, the arrangement between the Anglophone countries, Canada, New Zealand, Australia and America, where we share intelligence. They are not part of that, so their intelligence is somewhat separate from ours. And just in general, they also have an indigenous sort of arms and aviation industry, which is more independent of America. And it's not to say they don't rely on America at all. Of course they do. But our dependence on America is far greater than theirs. And it's why President Macron is able to stand up, as he has done, and threaten very significant potential retaliation of a trade sort via the European Union against America in a way that Keir Starmer just won't at the moment. And Keir Starmer says, which is perfectly right, that a trade war would be very damaging for British businesses, just as if there is a trade war between the European Union and America, would be very damaging for European Union businesses, and therefore nobody would enter into a tit-for-tat tariff or other forms of protectionism war with America. But the European security, or certainly French security, is simply not as dependent on US cooperation as ours is.
We've got all sorts of games for all sorts of treacles.
I'm claustrophobic, Danny!
It's coming home. It's our most generous January ever. Get a guaranteed win every Saturday this January on Paddy's Wonder Wheel. Paddy Power Games.
President Trump is ramping up pressure on his campaign to acquire Greenland. He plans to impose 10% tariffs on NATO allies who've sent military forces into Greenland. Fresh CBS News polling shows most Americans are not on board with that.
Big number of Americans, more than 8 in 10, say they would disapprove of the U.S. using military force to try to take control of Greenland. Now, you don't get that big of a number without bipartisan support or feeling the same way, and this is how those parties break down. Majorities of Republicans and Democrats and independents would all disapprove.
CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman is traveling with the president and joins us live now from West Palm Beach in Florida. Good morning, Willie. Tell us about the response to the president's tariffs.
Hey there, Errol. Good morning to you. Well, there has been a range of responses, mostly pushing back against the president's bid to acquire Greenland by any means necessary. Remember, the president said that he could acquire Greenland the easy way or the hard way being by using a military force to acquire the Arctic territory, which is under the control of Denmark. We, of course, know Denmark is a NATO ally, so this would certainly upend the situation with NATO, so many members are concerned there. But there has been some bipartisan pushback against this. You mentioned that polling. The Americans essentially say they don't want federal dollars being used, so 70% of them say they don't want those federal dollars being used to purchase Greenland, but lawmakers are pushing back against this as well. Listen.
I think certainly Greenland and the Greenlanders need to decide their future and their outcome.
There is no current security threat from Russia or China to Greenland. The only security threat to Greenland right now is the United States.